Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Shooting Straight with me, Voice of the Forge. As always, I will be shooting from the lip with no script and no edits, purely on a matter of, this time, on the phrase Git Good and the controversies surrounding it. Now, I find this somewhat ironic given the fact that not that long ago I did upload Confessions of a Gamer 2 Failing to Succeed, which was all about not being great at video games of certain genres and yet still being able to get through content, being able to enjoy a game and be able to discuss it in some way, shape or form. Now with Polygon and Doom and Rock, Paper, Shotgun both weighing into the fray, I am now going to revisit this topic. As I've said in the previous video, I am not very good at first-person shooter games. That said, I do play the occasional shooter game, such as Borderlands. Whilst I've enjoyed those to a degree, they have been somewhat of a trial. I currently play Destiny, and at the same time, these are not the kind of games that I prefer. Were you to look at my gaming history over the many years of gaming that I've had, you would find that racing games do not play a large amount in my library, and yet I have loved, across many iterations, Gran Turismo, Forza and other similar games, whilst I can't stand, for gameplay and aesthetic reasons, the Need for Speed franchise. Likewise, there are people that can quite happily play Grand Theft Auto who despise Saints Row, or like Just Cause but can't get into Far Cry. There are huge swathes of people who play games for different reasons. But when it comes to reviewing a game, that is something else entirely. I have been very careful with what I've put on YouTube. I haven't said that I am reviewing a game, I am doing X, Y or Z with a game. I haven't even said that when I'm doing certain things, I've even done a Let's Play. I've done a Gets Played. And purely it's showing, to a degree, that there is this game out there which is somewhat different, that I have enjoyed and I wish to show other people. And the prime example of this is Stardew Valley, which I've got 5 videos up for. The only reason there isn't more is that I've had a technical difficulty and I've had to switch computers, and all of the old gameplay saves are on the old computer, so I'm having to replay up to a certain point to be able to catch up to what I've actually shown in the videos, so that future video content shows new things, shows progression, and shows something which happens later on in the game. Now, if I couldn't play Stardew Valley for toffee, and I'm currently stuck doing the same things over and over again because I've either missed a fundamental part of what I'm supposed to be doing, or I don't understand how the game is supposed to work, then I do a disservice to the people who are looking at my video looking for information. It would be like advertising an achievement solution on an Xbox and then failing to get it time and time again. I'd be wasting their time. I'd be wasting my time. And whilst this phrase Git Good is floating around, I am reminded by a friend of mine who hated Bioshock. And at every turn he would badmouth Bioshock. Now, to the rest of us who were playing it at the time, this game was something new, it was something immersive, it was different, it held our attention, and we were enjoying playing through the game. We wanted to know what happened next. But he couldn't get past the fact that there was no fail state. The fact that when you died, you just got resurrected in a Vita chamber. Well, if you knew where to look, there is an option to turn off the Vita chamber respawn. And when I showed him where this was, and he turned it off, and once more the game had a fail state, it had a penalty for not doing X, Y or Z, then he couldn't get enough of the game either. And I have noticed that there is this trend in a lot of press coverage to remove portions of the game. Like, people have turned around about removing combat from things like Dragon Age so that they can enjoy the story. Well, I'm sorry, but if that's what you want to do, then go watch a movie. That medium already exists where you don't have to do anything. Gaming is an active medium, not a passive one. And I find it difficult because I can agree on so many levels that just being an expert gamer doesn't qualify you to be an expert reviewer, because communication is key. But at the same time, there has to be a level of meritocracy. And people see this meritocracy as being something unwholesome, as being toxic. And yet, we have to differentiate between the good and the bad. Now, a lot of the arguments that I've seen have polarised the debate between rubbish and expert. They don't take into consideration that there is this sliding scale whereby I say that I'm not very good at games, but I might be a 7. And yet somebody else who says they're not very good at games might be a 4. And then other people come along and they're a 10. And they go, well, I don't play games very often, I'm just naturally good at games. Whether it's the twitch reflex, the ability they've got to pick up on complex cues quicker than somebody else, whatever it is that makes them better at a certain game, it's something they have naturally. Some people can work at it, some people are just naturally better. The same with athletes. And the same with students, with sciences, and other jobs. This is a reason why we have qualifications that have grade marks. This is why in America there's a grade point average. In the UK we just have a letter scale. This is why when you go to UK universities, you have to acquire so many UCAS points to be able to get onto a course. You have to have proven that you're able to perform at a certain level. People say that games aren't exams. I agree in part, but I also fundamentally disagree. Games are the ultimate in scientific theory. You pick up the controller, you use the controller, you see what happens on the screen, which is feedback, you learn from the feedback. The better you are at learning from the feedback, the better you are at the game, the better your results become, the more experimentation that you may do. What happens if I do this? What happens if I do that? Oh look, I've found something new in this corner that I thought I couldn't get to before, and you're rewarded for it in some games. Case in point, Borderlands, jumping about all over the map. There's lots of hidden things that if you're like me and you just want to play the storyline, you wouldn't find. Now, these are rewards for the conscientious gamer, and for years now, I don't know about anywhere else, I'm UK centric, I'm based in the UK, the UK is what I know, so the UK is what I talk about. There has been a push for getting rid of failure. People can't afford to fail. it's a prizes for all culture in schools. We have seen the decline of competitive sports because you can't have people losing a game. You can't have people losing. You can't have people failing. Why the hell not? It's how we learn. Life doesn't owe us anything. If we make a bad decision, we have consequences, which are negative. You make a bad decision in a video game, you get to retry. You don't get to retry in life. And it's this erosion of meritocracy that we have seen in the schooling system, in sporting things, in education and elsewhere, is now finding its way into games where, oh no, I'm just as valid as you are because I've picked up a controller for 5 minutes, is utter bunk. And this is excused by putting the word hardcore in front of a game. It's used by putting hardcore in front of gamer. And this is seen as being toxic, as being undesirable. But all it is an extension of the bullying that people have faced since time immemorial for having a different hobby. We've got so many people now who roleplay, who play things like Dungeons and Dragons or similar games. And yet, when these things were popular in the 70s and the 80s, people were ridiculed or feared because they were demon worshippers by the Christians, by the jocks. All we are seeing is a repetition of marginalisation, of bullying, of labelling, and then people holding their nose and go, ooh, not them, they're horrible, they're nasty. It's all part and part of the same thing, and because they are the people that have come into this medium, and they say, well, this is our medium, because this is part of what we are, they want their diversity at the expense of everybody else's. There's this, World of Warcraft saw it, whereby you went from a position where maybe 20%, if they were lucky, of the player base would see end game content, the last 10% maybe of the game. And there's this push to, well, everybody's paid into it, everyone deserves equal access. Well, if I'm paying for my education, then surely I deserve the same grade as someone who's done all the work, even if I've done none. It's exactly the same thinking, and it's because we have got away from thinking about worth. We have got away from thinking about the person who puts in 10 hours a week practice at an instrument, that he might actually know something when it comes to guitar music. If I want an opinion about something, I want it to be if I'm looking for someone to have an opinion, I want it to be an informed opinion. And this whole thing with Doom and Polygon was, this is someone who couldn't move and shoot in a first-person shooter game. That was me with first-person shooters in the original Halo 1 Xbox. Now, I'm not an expert first-person shooter gamer, but I've been able to hold my own very well, thank you, online in games like Destiny. And I say I'm not very good, but at least I've got the basics. Likewise, when I showcase games like Stardew Valley, I don't make any great claims to knowledge about the game. I'm going, oh look, this is a great game, it's similar to the other great games that I've loved. have a look, you might like it as well. But if I've never played Harvest Moon, or Rune Factory, or the space version of these games, if I don't know the heritage, if I don't know where this game has come from, just as some people didn't know where Doom had come from, because they were talking about it in terms which were vastly overblown, just as people who say, oh, you can't have engaging narratives, when they point to a game like Undertale, and yet it's been beaten in the past by a couple of decades, when the market was even more of a niche than it is now. If you don't have a history of the grounding of games, of the language of games, of where a particular game has come from, or even why a particular game might not be the best game for you because another game does it better, that is doing a customer base a disservice. And yet the comment comes back, well, we can't list every game because people won't be able to follow that. That just means we're giving them more games to talk about, and this and that and the. And I guess, yeah, it's called research. That's your job. If you are going to say game A is brand new but game B does it better, you tell them why game B does it better. If it does it better than game C, then you tell them why it does it better than game C. It has this mechanic which works really well, which if you enjoy this sort of thing you'll enjoy, but it doesn't do this other thing very well, which if you're looking for this as a mechanic for your main gameplay, then you won't get the same enjoyment out of it. How many games do we have now where people look for crafting, a deep crafting system? If you've got a game which is like Zelda, then telling them that it's got a crafting system isn't going to be very useful if they want a crafting system like Minecraft. But if you don't know enough about the game genres and how they cross over and interact and where they belong in a big great graph of gaming, as John Walker of Rock Paper Shotgun so crudely puts it, then you can't make the nuance available to the reader, to the consumer, to the viewer. There's a reason why people like Jeremy Clarkson and James May host Top Gear. There's a reason why they're having difficulties with other drivers like Matt LeBlanc and Chris Evans. There's a reason why you get famous chefs in television cookery shows, and why we also like to see people fail, which is why we have shows like the Great British Bake Off. But the Great British Bake Off doesn't have any illusions about what it's selling. And I believe that a lot of, quotes, games journalists, end quote, are in denial. They don't realise that they are the Great British Bake Off of games journalism, of journalism full stop. They think they're the Kate Adie. They think they're the Bee's Knees. They think they should be. They think they're the Newsnight, the news at 10. Top news stories, best anchors in the world. And yet they're little more than a sideshow, where people are looking and going, yeah, okay, yeah, I can see how they've done that, yeah, that's cool. And this is why YouTubers and other people are starting to make an indent into the traditional marketplace. And it's because they are under no illusion. They are selling entertainment. If people are streaming and they are showing people having a good time, showing how a game works, they know what they're doing. They don't think they're building this grand magnum opus of body of work. They're entertaining people. And for a few people, they're able to make a darn good living at it. And hats off to them. I wish I could do the same. But I've got a YouTube channel. One, because I like to talk, hence shooting straight. Two, because if I find a game that I enjoy, I want to be able to share it with people and say, this game may slip beneath your radar. Have a look at it. The game style might not be for you, the graphics might be a bit cutesy, but there's a solid game underneath it. Don't dismiss it because of X, Y or Z. Have a look. If you've got a question about the gameplay, come back at me. Ask me. I'll talk about it. There'll be a dialogue. And that seems to be missing in these people that seem to think that I'm a games journalist and I've written an article, therefore my word, oh yes, I'm brilliant. And that they can't be criticised without it being seen as harassment. Why do they think Gamergate came about? Gamergate came about because there were games being made by indie developers that were being crowded out of the marketplace by people who thought they could gatekeep the industry, because if a game didn't conform to their ideological way of thinking, then it didn't deserve to get a market share. Exactly the same thing as what happened with the Rabid and Sad Puppies at the Hugo Awards for 2 years running, which incidentally predated Gamergate, because people could see what was happening in the literary world. And we've had an argument on Rock Paper Shotgun about the difference between someone who reviews books and someone who reviews games, and what skill sets are required, and everything else. And yet we're seeing the same problem. We're seeing people who don't understand the semiotics and analysis of a narrative in comics criticising the way certain things look. We've seen people adopt a Western-centric, colonialist view, to use their language, over Japanese games. And they can't see that it's them themselves that are the minority which is pushing for a lack of diversity. They can't see that they're trying to gentrify the space to suit themselves, rather than looking at the culture as a whole and seeing that actually, yeah, the culture is incredibly diverse. And, not to put too fine a point on it, I was talking to a friend of mine tonight, and we were talking about how people identify with video games. And it's kind of like, well, if you're Sonic, what are you identifying as? This is something that I did in the Shooting Straight video, which you can find on Dailymotion, Forgotten Forge Games, 2 years ago. Who does Sonic represent? Well, we were talking about Peggle, and I was saying, well, who does the player identify as? The pegs of the ball. Male, female, doesn't matter. You're playing a game. It's abstract. The fact that pixels look a certain way, it's all abstract. And yet you've got people that have said, oh no, this is the male gaze, and oh it's this, it's oh it's that, it's oh it's the other. And quite frankly, they're talking pretentious bullshit. Because if we look at the language of objectification, which is Sarkeesian talks about, well, I'm sorry, but if you're playing a male character and you're moving the male character, you're objectifying the male character, because you are acting on him. He's subject to your input via the controls. So does that mean that when we've got a woman playable character like Lara Croft or Bayonetta, that's somehow worse objectification? Or are you going to then fall back on your, well, women as scenery, women as prizes tropes, even when women themselves are playable characters? You can't win with these people. They'll always find a fence. Just like with Ubisoft and Assassin's Creed. Oh, there's no female playable character. Oh, you're sexist. So they cave. They put in a woman character. And then the next thing you know, oh, they're only doing it because they're playing this card to get sales. You can't win. And like with these people, you can't win. They will take and they will take and they will take. But there comes a point when, just like I've had to learn about editing and everything else, these are all skills we have to learn, I've had to get better than I was. It's called learning. It's called growth. It's called advancement. So if someone tells you to Git Good, they may not necessarily be hostile. They may just be saying that you need to grow in some way, shape or form with your game playing. The thing is, they don't have the language necessarily to put it in the same way that I would. Their brain knows what they want to say, but their vocabulary might be lacking. Now that could be because they're young. It could be because they're not well read, well versed in discourse and building an argument for a debate. It could even be that English is a different language and they know very few words, so they have to use short, sharp sentences for the sake of clarity. The thing is, when you're dealing with people in a faceless, voiceless vacuum, and you only have the dry text, an awful lot of context is lost, and an awful lot of assumptions are made. That's it. I can't say any more on this. I already covered this topic once, but I find it ironic that it's not long after I've covered it in one way that it's being covered again in a different way. And I say that just because someone says you need to be better at something doesn't necessarily mean to say that they're hostile. It may just be that you do actually need to get better. It may actually be that you don't have the skill set that you think you do. You maybe not be as good as you think you are. It's something I wrestle with daily, that I may not be as good as I think I am. I may not be as good as I think I am, but at least I'm trying to improve. At least I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to take on board that criticism. And when we look at these outlets, we've got to ask them the same thing. Are you? And I don't think they are. And that's when we should stop supporting them and find people who are willing to engage, who are willing to put in the time, the effort, the research, both in learning how to play the games and knowing about the games. Yeah, some of these people will need money to be able to do that. They need to be able to live. They need to be able to gain from the knowledge that they have in some way, shape or form. I'm not against that. I'm all for it. Hell, if I could market what I knew, then I'd be vastly wealthier than I am now. I'm trying to find a niche for the way in which my knowledge works. So far I've not found it. Oh well, I'm trying to get better at finding it. You see, it works in all kinds of connotations, not just in games. And that's why I find it so repulsive when people turn around and say that it's toxic and that it's argumentative and all this, that and the other. No, it's not. Sometimes it can be the best thing that someone can say to you. I'll leave you with that thought. I'll thank you for listening. I am, as always, Voice of the Forge. And if you have any questions or you want to debate anything that I've said, I will more than happy debate people. I will be more than happy to have a dialogue with anybody. Because when we're all talking, we're all winning. It's only when we put our fingers in our ears and go la la la, I'm not listening, like some people do, which is equivalent to the block button on Twitter, that's when we all lose. Because we're no longer communicating. We only hear reinforcements and echoes of our own thoughts. And that's never a good place to be. Thank you for listening. I am, as always, Voice of the Forge. Take care, and I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Thank you.